Okay, I think there's still a few people outside, but if we wait till everybody will be here at 2:30. Thank you once again for coming back, and thanks for your questions in the morning session. Today we have, or this afternoon, we have 2 more men. We have to do something about that, I think. We have
I can't grow ahead.
I think that the gender balance gets a lot better on certain other days, I have to say, but today is particularly extreme. But I'm delighted to introduce Mario Rizzi, who will speak before Roger. Roger Buergel is in the house, as they say about Elvis, and he will be speaking after Mario, which actually I think is a kind of appropriate mix as well, because it's interesting now to see an artistic practice at the same moment as we're talking directly about the relationship between art and politics. Mario is based in Italy, in Turin, but is traveling constantly, and as you'll see by the nature of his work, it requires him to travel constantly. He's shown recently in a number of significant exhibitions, the Sharjah Biennale and Istanbul Biennale, and also the Jerusalem show, which I think recently closed, which was curated by Jack Persekian. He's also shown in many other exhibitions.
Gothenburg with this.
And also in the Göteborg Biennale. That's the biennales that he's done in the last 2 years. There are also many other shows in Germany, in Italy, and elsewhere where he has been present. But Mario's practice is very much located, I think, and situational in this sense, and that's something that reflects back on some of the issues that were brought up previously. The question of what a situated practice might be and what it might produce. Mario has been invited by us as vanabbemuseum to be not only part of the caucus today, but also to make a situated work in the Netherlands, Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And that's a work that will be made during caucus, and the participants that are here will have many further chances to meet him. But also will be produced subsequently and will be shown in its final form, we hope. If there's a project that comes out of this whole process, then it will be shown in its final form in May 2008 in the exhibition Becoming Dutch. Mario, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I thought about talking. The title of the talk is Neighbours, because it is concentrated on my last piece, which I realized which is a 6-screen video piece, which I realized in Israel and Palestine in 2006, and that's why I was mentioning the little Gothenburg Biennale, because at the moment it's there as well, and not only in Jerusalem. But I thought also for the people that were not here in January during the gathering, maybe I should give a very short introduction to my work to those who don't have an idea of my work. I work very situationally, as Charles said. At the same time, I work very much about identity. I work very much about the idea of a multicultural society today. So some ways very appropriate to this Becoming Dutch. And I thought to show you just only 6, to mention only a few works, and to show you only 6 slides, and then I will show you just pieces from Neighbours. So this image is the symbol of a project which was in Berlin in 2003, and which consisted in realizing as an art project the possibility for 2 Kurdish immigrants which were not accepted as refugees. They could marry, and this was the poster which was at the beginning of the project, and this is what happened after, when it realized for real. They could marry, although they had no rights as they were refugees, but they couldn't be sent back to Iraqi Kurdistan, but at the same time, because of the war, but at the same time they had no rights. But it happened in the Kunsthaus Bethanien, their real wedding. So the accumulation of images, of stories, of words, of papers, documents that were, and the images of that wedding, the real wedding reception was what was the remaining out of it, but it was the happening itself that was what it was important for me. And for Sharjah Biennial that Charles Esche mentioned, I presented also there a 6-screen piece. I thought to show you this image so that you know what I mean when I speak about multi-screen installation and working on multi-screen. In my case, is I'm very much a storyteller in the way of working. I try to choose some people. My method is usually when I decide to work on a specific situation, I begin with an idea that I want to develop, and then or some stories that I'm very interested, curious myself to investigate or to enter or to get in touch, to try to find what is the story behind, the people behind, the humanity behind these stories. And then every story, every person usually take to the second one, to the next one. So I don't begin with a precise map in this sense. I begin with an idea from where I want to really to develop the project, and an idea that I want to go on with. About Out of Place, which was in the Sharjah 2005, Biennial 2005, it was a piece on second-generation immigrants living in Paris. Actually, at the moment, until 30th of March, is in a show also in Paris by the city of Paris. And it was a work made in clips, so following 14 immigrants of second generation. I found that was very much interesting to concentrate on people with two characteristics. First of all, not the poor immigrant, the immigrant that comes only, that we identify as somebody that is only in need, but on the contrary, somebody that is in need, but at the same time is very strongly inserted since the beginning, in the sense that even when I was dealing with the Roma community, Gypsy community, I was anyway talking about the story of a professor at INALCO, that is the languages part, Oriental languages part of Sorbonne, of a famous singer here, Mexican. So it was not about the difficulties, but it was about the fact of being second generation. When you are first generation, usually immigrant, it is always you try to adequate yourself to the society where you arrive. You try to be as the other, to try not to feel the difference, not to make the other people feel the difference, but as I think everybody can imagine, in the second generation you ask more to yourself, who am I, where do I belong? And it was what was interesting for me in that piece. Then in January, I showed a piece of this film, which was created for Istanbul Biennial 2005 with Charles Esche Vasif cartoon, and which was a story of a father and a son that are shoemaker in a little artisan shop in Istanbul, and through this microcosm I tried to point out their own story, their own conflicts, their own different point of view on the society that is changing every day and very strongly in Turkey, but also about also their own relation and the way they can every day go on. And what is interesting, coming now to Neighbours, that's why I chose this image, is thinking about what I wanted to tell you today, is that there are some constant, three constants that are, constantly there are three kinds of people that I'm always interested about to work with. And it is all people that are at the same time unaffiliated, so I'm very much less interested about the possibility of somebody that is more affiliated to a particular kind of political or agenda, but also at the same time that are without a precise country some way. And there are the Kurdish people that I mentioned before in the project before, the Roma people, and the Palestinian. And It was not the first time when I was in 2006 that I came to Palestine. I was invited by the Jerusalem Center for the Visual Arts already in 2001 to make a project, which was the first time I was in the area, in Israel in that case, in Jerusalem exactly. And in that occasion I worked on an exchange of gifts. I was very much interested about this idea of a gratuitous gift between people, in which I was some way the medium of exchange. And everybody had to choose an object. There were 37 people on the Jewish side and 37 people on the Palestinian side that I met in the most normal moments of life. Could be on a bus, could be on the shop, could be on the street. And I asked them to give me an object they wanted to give as a gift to the other, which was possibly not really related to their ethnical or religious background, but related to their own personal history. And I chose this just to show you about the project. It was interesting, and everybody had to write to the other. So there was a book that was published called The Gift, exactly a bit the Marcel Mauss idea of a free gratuitous gift. And there was in the text of this gift, there was a Palestinian, in this case, that was mentioning the fact that Palestine was for her like, was a woman, like this bottle of perfume, very beautiful to see, but also very fragile. And when, during Sharjah Biennial 2005, as the 2007, was curated by Jacques Persekian. And Jacques Persekian asked me in that occasion if I was interested to come back to the area to work on a project, which happened. I was from May till August 2006 without an interruption, and I worked on I began also, that's why I mentioned before the fact that I begin from a single story. I began with two stories in mind, and I will show you these two clips of the stories. One was the story of a woman called, of two women on the two sides of the fence, we can say. One, Anadi Jaradat, was one of the only women that was a suicide bomber, and definitely the only person that was completely unaffiliated. She committed her bombing, her kamikaze situation, if we want, just as a consequence after 3 months that when she was 7 years before, because her boyfriend was killed, but 3 months before she bombed herself, her cousin and her brother that was going to marry in 2 days were killed in front of herself. So some way she was feeling, as she was the oldest one in the family, that she had to do something, and at the moment she was not linked to any Hamas or Jihad or whatever, and she decided to do this. For me it was interesting to know the family that was behind, to see what was behind, and I knew it was very difficult, it could be very difficult, it wasn't really in reality, but it could be very difficult maybe to enter in this family and to live their own life and to film moments of their real life. So what I'm going to show you of the different pieces, you have always to think that the project is lasted the last 55 minutes and is on 6 screens, so you have always 5 other screens with images. So it's different to show you now just always what happens on one of them. So now I'm showing you, for example, the clip in which there is a sound in those 6 minutes. And about this story, but at the same time you have to think that on another screen you see also other images of the family. On a third screen you see other images of the family as well, because I was 3 days and I filmed the 3 days. And on 2 other screens, Jenin and Jenin Camp. And there is, in the project, there is a 6th screen that is the most personal. It was my waiting, my moment of my personal, it was more personal, it was my personal difficulty, but some way I will show you later. So I begin by showing you the story of Anadi Jaradat.
أنا مش من بلد اسمها بيسان. أنا علمت بنتي محامي، ما حرمتني من اللقم من جنبي، كلفتني مبلغ كبير على أساس إنه تيجي هون وتكون دائما مع الحق.
خطيبها اللي بالأولاني قتلوه على الشرع الالتفافي بال96، بقى يدرس بالجامعة الثانية يعني سنة ثالثة، قبلها بسنة هو أكبر منها بسنة. مروح من الجامعة ويعني وراح مع أصحابه شمة هوا، وقفوا له بلشوا بالسيارة قتلوهم الثلاثة مع بعضهم، وهي بقت تدرس بجامعة الأردن. أما نقول يعني هذول اثنين لبعضهم، كيف إحنا أولاد العم يعني بيعطوا لبعض، يعني أبوها وأبوها يقولوا هاي البنت لابن عمها، فكملوها بهذا ابن عمها الثاني، هذا متجوز عنده ولد وعنده بنت وأخوها. إيه هذاك ابني بكيت أنا خاطب له، ورحنا على الأردن كسينا يعني وجهزنا وكل شيء واستأجر بيت وبقى يظبط بيه وكل كبير، وعوض 7 بنات تشافت وكبر. يعني الفرحة بقت إلها، هي اللي خطبت له، هي اللي تجهز له، هي اللي يعني إحنا رحنا على الأردن الكيتا استأجرت له بيت، الكيتا مثلت له، جايبت له، يعني لو يطلب عمرها تعطيه جاف، بدهم إياها تعيش، ما هي عايشة لهدف لأخ ولا بيت. لما أبوها مريض راحت بيجي 6-7 نقلات على سالم تعمل له التسريح مشان تعالجه بحيفا. آخر فترة قالوا لها أنت مرفوض، جردات مرفوض، قالت لهم والله بيكون إلي الشرف إني أكون جردات وبديش إياها هالتسريح. روحت لأبوها ثم استشهد أخوها، روحت لبقت له فيش أمل إنك تتعالج، خلص. صايمة 2 شهر، خاتم القرآن 6 نقلات المصحف، ليلتها تخطط لها شو تعمل، أصبح ليلتها استشهدت. يعني بتأمن باللي وراها أخرى يعني. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الحمد لله، الله يرضى عليهم. فيش أغلى من الولد، بيعدلوش إلا ربه. يعني لو فلسطين ينطوني إياه يعضون عن بنتي أو ابني ما بحبهاش.
أنا إنسان قبل ما تستشهد أنا وفادي وابني كنت قوي.
بقى جاي عنا هو بالطريق ضيف، ابني عامل يعني قهوة، وقاعدين إحنا بنقعد في باب الدار، عندنا ساحة وورد وهذا، قاعدين بباب الدار، وابني بيشتغل بالحسبة مع هذا نسيبه بقى يعني يشتغل بالحسبة، ما له بقضية السياسة ولا له بإشي. فقاعدين على باب الدار بناتي يعني كلياتهم مع مركة هذا الشاب، بعده واقف ما سعيه إلا سيارة بتطخ ب2 باب الدار. ابني تصاوب، صابوه بكتفه، اجت اخته دش عن خواته قال لي نفوتن جوا انا متت. ابني اخذوه طيب بس صاوبوه، فاخذوه صفوه رصاصه هنا رصاصه هنا، يعني كل جسمه ايديه وحالته. بقى عندنا صغير ابن 3 سنين، بقى عمره ابن 4 سنين ابنه، يعني انقتل ابوه قدامه.
شو بده يذكر؟
لا والبنت يعني بقت حامله بالبنت، خلفت اخرى بنت مرته، فهي اول واحده يعني راحت على المستشفى. قالت لهم انا بدي اشوفه، لما جابوه قالت لهم بدي اشوفه، منعوها، قالت لهم بدي اشوفه بديش اعيط، وهي اللي نظفته ومسحت له وجهه، هنالي مسحت له باكين يضرب فيه بهوز الباروده، كل وجهه تراب ودم وحالته حاله، هي نظفته. طالوا من الثلاجة وقالوا لها، قالت لهم بديش اعيط، انا بديش اعيط بس بدي اشوفه. سحبوا عادك وطالوا، قالت لهم انا بدي انظف لاخوي وجهه وامسح له التراب الدم اللي بوجهه. فشو بدهم يعني من هنادي زياده عن هيك؟ يعني بدها هنادي تسمي عليهم؟ يعني انت عايشه لهدف والهدف راح منك، شو ضل قدامك؟
اثنين بالأهم، هنادي ما راحت فترة شعب، خشت على مطعم خاص بالعسكريين أصحاب القرى، ما راحتش هيك تشوف يلا في سوق ونرجعني، اختارت بالضبط. 2 اليهود بيقولوا عنا إرهابيين. طيب حددوا لنا وين نطلق شيء يكون شيء ما على لسان
برحموش حد. طب انا بنتي عملت عمليه، انا شو ذنبي تيجي تهدوا بيتي؟ بعاقبوا جماعي هم. يعني هو واحد استشهادي بروح بقول لاهله؟ هو في واحد بقول لابنه روح؟ ولد بيرعجدوه، الولد بده يصيب دبابه ولا يصيب كيف بطخوا ابن ال10 سنين ابن 8 سنين من حجر اللي بيراجد؟ خليه يراجد، ما هو لو راجد ليل نهار بصيبش شيء على الدبابه، بده يهد دبابه الحجر هو. يعني كم طفل قتلوا؟
So the other story is the story of Tali Fahima, and I have also to say first that there was a point I wanted to develop. I was very interested to work on, and it was the idea of Agamben of the state of exception, because I found that it was a bit talking about Palestine and Israel some way, and a particular state of exception, particular emergency situation, because it has always been even declared in the parliament. Every 2 years they vote for what they call state of emergency. Some way I could talk about the situation also today everywhere, particularly in the Western world. And I was also very much interested by a phrase that is in Agamben Italy, say that the close analogies he found between the state of exception and the right of resistance. So much that he mentioned that Italy, so I'm very happy in this case also that regards my own history. Italy has been the country when there was, after the Second World War, the constitution that tried to put an article in the constitution that would read that when the public powers violate the rights and fundamental liberties guaranteed by the constitution, resistance to oppression is a right and a duty of the citizen. I find that this is completely forgotten a bit today, no? And so I worked on the stories there, taking this idea in mind. So about Tali Fahima, I guess the story you will see directly here. Okay, these are the dates. I try, so I don't need to synthesize it.
اتصلت علي. كان حديث بيننا ليش يعني ما تكونش فيه هدنة ومش غلط السلاح وغلط المسائل. وخرفت عن الواقع اللي يعيش الشعب الفلسطيني عن طريق التليفون ما صدقتش. كان يعني مستغربة تحكي انه يعني اللي بتحكيه انت مش معقول.
The man is Zacharias Beatty.
انا ما كنتش جدي يعني بالحديث.
وبالتالي كان اتفاق بينهم وهو فهي تفاجأت جدا يعني لما شافت الدمار والخراب الموجود في المخيم والحياة الصعبة اللي بيعيشوها الناس في المخيم. فهون كان بداية التحول زي ما بقول يعني بفكرة، على الرغم ان هي كانت من الناس اللي اخر الانتخابات صوتت لشارون تقريبا باسبوع 10 ايام، وعاشت معنا في البيت هنا زيها زي اي واحد في البيت. زكريا يعني امه وابوه كان طفل يعني في بيتهم كان في عندك مسرح، وكان في زي ما نقول يعني يجوا عليه من دعاة السلام الإسرائيليين ومن فرنسا ومن إيطاليا ومن كل المناطق، كان في مسرح في بيتهم، كانوا يجوا من أنصار السلام الإسرائيليين. فبالتالي الجيش الإسرائيلي حتى ما ميز هذا، قتل أمه لزكريا وأخوه استشهد في الاجتياح للمخيم.
لا فحكوا عن قصة حب بس ما كانش قصة حب، بس حقيقة يعني في حب يعني عاطفي للزواج وفي حب للبني ادم، فهمت علي كيف؟
وكانت بلحظات زي ما تقول يعني باستمرار يعني مبين على وجهها كثير، يعني كانت لما تكون مبسوطه ضحكتها كانت تكون عاليه يعني توصل اخر المخيم، ولما بتزعل دموعها.
لا هي ما غيرت مجتمعها الاسرائيلي، هي ما غيرت عاداتها وتقاليدها، هي ما تخلت عن يهوديتها كمان، بعدين حتى لو تغيرت بتكون تكذب على نفسها. هي حكت ان انا بعتز بيهوديتي، ان انا يهوديه، فهمت علي كيف؟ بس بنفس الوقت انا ضد اليهود بالاحتلال، بس تغير الفكر تبعها انه الشعب الفلسطيني مجرم ولا مش مجرم؟ الشعب الفلسطيني من حقه انه يقاتل ولا مش من حقه انه يقاتل؟ من حقه انه يفجر نفسه ولا مش من حقه انه يفجر نفسه؟
كثير كانوا زي ما نقول علاقة احترام كثيرة، بس اللي كانت عندهم مشكلة إنه هاي بتحكيش عربي مضبوط وهاي بتحكيش عربي مضبوط.
كان أبو أنطون واسطة، هي بتعرفش عربي وأنا بعرفش عبري، كان أبو أنطون ساعة بترجم لي ساعة بترجمها، حتى كان ينجن منه بيقعد يكاتل علينا، أنا بقول له شو بتقول وهي بتقول لي شو بتقول.
في أحد المرات أجوا يدوروا عليها يعني بدهم يعتقلوها ولا في الحارة أنا يعني، وطبعا دخلوا معظم البيوت ولا، وطبعا ما فيش حدا من الجيران اعترف إنه في واحد ولا. في الوقت اللي هي كانت موجودة عندنا في البيت يعني. فأخذوني يوميتها اعتقلوني أنا وسألوني عنها، قلت لهم ما بعرفش عنها اسمها، فكروا عادي يعني مش المرة الأولى يعني بعتقلوني أنا، يعني المرة الثانية، وعادي الاعتقال بالنسبة لنا يعني في الدار شيء عادي جدا.
كانت تقول لي مشاكل هي وامها وانها مش حابه تيجي هنا على جنين، كنت اقول لها لا قد ما يكون الواحد بضلها امها ضلي تروحي عندها وردي عليها.
بالتالي مش تابعه لمؤسسه
منيحه طيبه خدومه.
What is a human rights lawyer? Of course it
It's a
has
fair
to do
lawyer.
with the state of emergency. I don't like to see the state here in Israel as a state of emergency. It couldn't be emergency all this time. Okay, there is normal life going on here. After Tali was detained for 3 months in administrative detention, finally the state found something that they could accuse her of. And this has to do with this document, a document that was given to soldiers acting within the Jenin refugee camp, describing the aims of the operation Alligator's Tears. And it has, the first page has 4 pictures of 4 wanted people. Zacharias Beatty is one of them, and another 3. Each one, it's written by the picture, the name, the ID number, and certain details, age, height, what kinds of weapons does he carry. And these are men that were wanted during that operation. And the next pages are air photographs of Jenin refugee camp. And this is the last one. The area you see here, called Ground Zero, is an area that was destroyed almost completely actually, you can see it, in the defensive shield operation. What Tali was accused of in relation to this document is that she read it and explained what's in this document and what the army's intentions, but you really don't need to know Hebrew to understand what the meaning of this is. And even if you do, Tali does not speak Arabic, so she couldn't have translated anything or explained anything. Actually, Zachariah is the one that speaks both Hebrew and Arabic, and he was the one to translate things in Arabic to her, and not the opposite. There are 800 administrative detainees that are Palestinians, and only one Jewish. So with Palestinians, it's quite a routine putting them into administrative detention. Some of them sit in administrative detention years, up to, I think the longest one was 5 years. And it is always based on secret information, which is not revealed to the detainee and to his lawyer. The minute Tali Fahima, which is part of the same privileged group that I am part of, took a step out of the way, as it was considered by the security system, she was started to be treated as if she was Palestinian. She lost her privileges as part of the Jewish dominant group.
So Many stories are in the work, and here you see the chronology of the story of Tali Fahim. Many stories are in the work that are about people I met, and I try to find the exception to the exception. So somebody that gave the body of his son for transplant to the Jewish, although was killed by Israeli soldiers, somebody that acts like the local Gandhi, and so on. But I realized very much, that's why you are seeing the images of Lifta, which is today a part of Jerusalem. I realized that very much the stories are linked very much with the architecture of the place. And there is this which was the biggest village of before 48, Palestinian village, which is divided in an upper part and in a lower part. And the upper part was then inhabited by the Israeli Jewish people arriving in the 48, but mainly by Iraqi refugees, so really in need anyway, as poor people in the moment in which they arrived. And partly it has been abandoned, and probably in these days it is destroyed. That's why I found it was very important to visit this place and to talk about this place. So on the 6th screen you see different images, and you hear the voice of a man that I met in Jordan and told me a bit of the story of this place, and you will hear just a phrase of him now. I thought it was very important to talk about this place because they are going to destroy it, although even against the opinion of the archaeologists, Israeli archaeologists, because they are going to build hotels, an hotel resort, because it's very near to Bethlehem, so they wanted tourists come to this hotel resort in Israel, leave money in Israel, and then they visit the Bethlehem. And at the same time, I touched the other aspects of architecture. I went to Ariel, which is the main colony, and now you will see something also from...
I went to visit Jerusalem. I was sick, and I said, I have to go and pray in Haram Sharif. And I went to my house and lived. I found a Jewish woman. I told her, can you allow me to go in the rooms? She said yes. I entered one room, the second room, the third room with a balcony showing all villages around. And I started to cry, cry, cry. She said, why do you cry? I said, here I was born. Here I studied. Here I became doctor. This is very, very, very good that I will never forget the room, the best room in the world.
And so this, I went to Amman to meet this man because today he lives in Amman. He created even the biggest private maternity hospital in Amman, because I wanted the story of this place through the story of somebody that lived there, and so this is just a phrase that I took for the talk. But I was telling you that there are in the work other 2 points that I found very important about the architecture. One was Ariel is a place that officially don't exist because it's not allowed to exist as a colony, but then there is a university that by chance is a university of architecture. So I really was very interested about this fact that in this place there is a university of architecture, and there is a lot about stories of people living there. But also I happen to know that in the days in which I was there, they were destroying, they were not destroying, they were transforming. You will see more. The house where Edward Said lived. It was a house in Talbiya that was the richest part of Jerusalem before 48, where all the rich family, Nashashibi, Said, and so on, were living before. And he never came back after 48. So even if he was allowed, actually, it had quite a long history, this house. And then I filmed it in different way. You will see it from inside, and you will hear 2 words about it. Oh, sorry.
I went to visit Jerusalem. I was sick.
No, sorry. Doesn't go to the 7. Let's go to the 8. No, it doesn't go. Sorry.
The Edward Said House, the famous professor of Oriental Studies, he was born in this house, which was built in the year 1936 and considered at the time a modern one. Later on, the house was inhabited by Professor Martin Buber, who was one of the founders of the Hebrew University here in Jerusalem.
An important real estate person in Jerusalem told me, for sure, for certain, 4 friends chipped in and they bought this building, and they're making rather elegant apartments with beautiful views. Apparently, because it's a landmark building, it has an important history, they're gutting the inside of the house but leaving the shell. So the outside will have the old, so-called original facade, but inside will be new and luxurious.
So I told you that instead the 6th screen was a bit my perception of the place. So I put together without the structure in clips, so without the structure in single stories, my waiting, and while waiting I was filming other people waiting, and my being stopped and my being in cars and so on. So you see something of that, and sometimes the stories were instead very normal. I wanted to synthesize really my feeling through the images, and sometimes also unexpected in the moment in which then I filmed the most normal moments of life. I found that the 2 could be interesting and funny, at least, to see this also this story of. Oh, okay. I spoke also a lot about the Russian community. I want to show you this very quickly, and particularly living with some components of this community. And they visited the wall in Abu Dis, which is the place where Jerusalem becomes the part of Palestine that is on the other side of the wall. And I thought it was interesting to show you these comments to the wall.
Америка. Но вот это государство. Флаг-то не израильский. Почему? Государство заказчик этого забора. Здравствуйте. Федеральный закон строит забор. Какое мировое сообщество дает? Вот во всех странах строится случай, мировое сообщество молчит. В Израиле нет, как молчит, они возникают, они против, всех же говорят. Строят заборы между... Россия оттяпала у Финляндии территорию, все с мировое сообщество. Моя бабушка говорила, заборы не от воров, а от честных людей. То есть вор, он, если сильно захочет, он найдет закон. А честный человек...
Если израильтяне скажут, нам надо усиливать свою силу сдерживания, да, плохо, так, то наши скажут, эти понимают только язык силы, да.
Люди находятся в том же самом положении духа. Это положение того, что люди не видят, что они стали большинством угнетающим, а не меньшинством угнетенным. Не говорится о палестинско-израильском конфликте, говорится об арабско-израильском конфликте. 250 миллионов арабов нас окружают, и все нас хотят убить.
И то же самое я не понимаю, что Чечня, например, не была оккупирована Россией, как бы, и люди там, в общем, даже а здесь все-таки оккупация, то есть есть какая-то разница, и какие-то другие мотивы.
So, I happen usually...
وأي فرشات بنتصامر وصبعيات تجرس يا زلمة أنت كده اشتغلت في بعيد عن ذكر الله بعيد عن ذكر
أنا طول عمري في إسرائيل أشتغل يا زلمة.
يا زلمة هذا
أنت كأن أكون عمري عايش في تل أبيب عند اليهود طول عمري والله العظيم والله العظيم يا زلمه صح اللي شغلك.
بقول لك انا اشتغلت يا فارس 6 سنين، اقول لك، واشتغلت مع 100 صبيه من اللد والرمله ومن جسر الزرقاء
من هالخالصات،
وبقيت اقول لك ما يعرفوش انه اسمه ناصر، والله العظيم ما ياكلوا لي الا عامي والله شرط وقط وسنسال وصبار ورنتكار واجرب بدل سنتها. وشو بدك يا سيدي؟ والله ما حدا في المستشفى عرفني اني عربي لاولاد الجلازون. والله كيف لما اتجوزت قلت خلاص هنا واضبط. يا حاج
انا ما عملتش.
وبعدين بكى يا حاج بطل كل شيء. انا بقيت اشتغل في المستشفى، هذول بجوز فيه 100 صبيه.
يا الله يا محمد يا الله.
هذول العربيات.
هذا لو راح
وعربيه بنات العرب ما انت عارفهم جوا.
هذا لو راح بجدي بشر.
انا بكيت اني شغلت
فارس قال انا بكيت في اسرائيل. طب وانت العالم اشتغلت في اسرائيل؟ ما كل
النسوان بكتش في راسي. انا بكيت شغله النسوان في راسي بالمره كده.
اللي تطلع على صباحه مبين.
So of course, when you speak about normal life, it is mostly a moment like this in the other clips. I wanted at least to show you now it's not only stories, but there's a lot of normality there. And I found the last clip, when all the other screens are black, the last clip is a short comment to the situation that is by Michael Warszawski, which is an intellectual from Israel.
I think we are, since the turn of the century, in a state of exception, which was somehow officialized by, after 9/11, by this concept of a global non-ending preemptive war. State of exception, and including in the laws, are becoming more and more the norm in European countries. A whole set of new internal security laws, making, erasing the difference between external threat and internal threat, between political and military threat and social threat. On the internal relationship inside the Israeli society, I believe that I will not use the concept of state of exception. I will more use the concept of permanent ambiguity. A permanent ambiguity around the issue, what kind of society, or I would say even more, what kind of nation are we? And what kind of nation are we building?
And last, on many screens sometimes there were some little text, and I will leave you with this little text that was at the same time on the other screen while Michael Warszawski was talking. Thank you.
It's an opportunity for questions for Mario, because we'll need a couple of minutes to turn over anyway, I think. Are there any questions? Also from upstairs. Can we get one of the microphones? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, there should be 3. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. I just wondered about the house that Edward Said and Martin Buber both lived in. Is that a coincidence or?
A coincidence that happened, a coincidence that was destroyed in that moment, yes. I told you that when I begin a project, I try to begin with an idea and with a story to begin with, and then the things usually, as I like to live in the place and I like to work in the place where I'm developing the project, everything connects to another thing and another thing. And I happen to know, I went to see the house of Edward Said because I was interested about this house. He actually in autoplays, in his autobiography, there is quite a nice description that is exactly like it was in the moment in which they were destroying, and I discovered that they were putting it down, at least leaving the shell. So I found that was very much symbolic.
Thanks. Are there any further questions or clarification for Mario? Or one up there?
I would like to know more about this gift project. Can you tell something more about it?
About the
gift?
About the gift?
Oh, the gift project.
Yes, I was in Israel, mainly in Israel and in some parts of Palestine in that moment, West Bank. I was interested in that moment about the two components, more about Israeli Jews and Arab Jews, Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, sorry. And there were also some Palestinians that, of course, because I went to the West Bank. But the idea was, in that moment, there was a moment of closure. It was the beginning of Second Intifada. And I found it was interesting, first of all, to suggest the idea of a gift that was not linked to a moment of contrast, that was linked more to explaining who we are. Because if you were speaking with people, they would say, oh, we know, I don't know, we know who Palestinians are, we go in their restaurant. Or if you say, oh, we know everything about the Jews, I don't know, we know what they live, but then how they live. But then there is nothing as going over just the surface and trying to meet. There are, of course, we saw just little pieces of this work, for example, but one in the work in Neighbours, for example, one is a woman that is Israeli but is Palestinian ethnically. She says that exactly when there are even manifestations, when there are protests or something, when the thing ends, when the work ends, we say we never go to eat together, we never get in touch together. So the project that I did years before was exactly about this, asking something that was about their own personal histories and that they wanted to give to the other, explaining why they chose this object, what it meant for themselves, trying to create really a link between among people.
So a couple more questions there, and then I think we'll bring it to a close. So first Delphine and then Ronan. Can you speak with the microphone, because otherwise people can't hear. It's coming to you.
Thank you. Are you intending to, one way or another, continue this project?
The story of Tali Fahima that you saw was, for me, very important, very interesting, and although you saw only a few characters of the story, some way, I went through the story for all the periods, for all the 4 months I was there. So one of my wish, my dream is to create completely fictionally, and it's a dream, I don't know if it will never realize, my end of the story of these two people, if they will ever meet again, because actually she's out of the prison, as you saw from the chronology, but she's not allowed to get any more in the West Bank, and she's not allowed to call the West Bank any Palestinian people, actually, and she cannot go abroad for 1 year. And so I would like to work on this idea more on the story, and particularly creating my own end of the story.
No, I had in mind when I asked you this film that you probably know is Rana's Children.
Yes.
Where they started this theater school. And
Zakaria is one of Rana's children, exactly. Yeah. Zakaria was one, so for who don't know what is, Arna was a woman, the mother of Giuliano Smer, that is a filmmaker, and Anna had a cancer, was an old woman, and decided to spend her last moment of last period of life creating a theater in Jenin camp, where children could kind of put out all their energies and aggressivity, and she acting and reenacting them some way theatrically. And there is a film that actually, it won even some festival like Tribeca Festival and so on. But there is a film in which Giuliano's mare, speaking about her mother, put in relation the footage he filmed during this experience of the theater with the period after some years, who they became, what they became. And it's a very sad some way to see this. It looks very pessimistically if you see it in that way, because actually all of these people or had somebody killed, or they died, or were killed themselves, or became a chief of the, like Zacharias Bedi, chief of the Al-Aqsa Brigade. But in reality, it's important that for them was also a cultural, at the beginning, a cultural resistance before becoming also a military one.
The last question is Ronan.
Well, it's more comment. You had an expression of like showing two sides of the fence, and being familiar with what you showed. I think the people you showed on the Israeli side are all probably on no side of the fence, because they were all non-Zionist Israelis. If it's Smadar, Mikado, Tali, the whole list, and I think it's almost not fair to show that, but by calling it two sides of the fence.
You have to think also that the project is 55 minutes on 6 screens. I have also people, Orthodox students living in Ariel. I have a lot of material on Bet Shemesh. Bet Shemesh is a city in Israel where that is a lower and an upper part. Correct me which is the lower, which is the upper, I always forget. But in the new part, the Russian community arrived. And they, of course, opened butchers and so on, where you can buy even pork and so on. What happened is that the other part, which was more Orthodox, the people came and burned the butcher. The Jewish people came to burn the butcher. And the day after, the Russian Jewish came down and burned the synagogue, saying, if you will burn our butchers, we will burn your synagogue. So just it's very interesting about the complexity that is not only about speaking about Palestinian and Jewish, but is much more complex, the situation, of course.
Okay, thanks, Mario, very much. And Mario will be around the next weeks, so he'll also be available. We now need to set up. Do we have your computer? I think that's an important aspect of it, no? But while we're setting up, I would like to introduce Roger Buergel. He probably needs very little introduction to many of you, but he was, until a few days ago, actually, the artistic director of Documenta 12. And before that, together with Ruth Noack, who was the curator of Documenta 12 at the same time, she was artistic director, he put together a number of very significant and important exhibitions, I think, that looked at the relationship between art and, we could say, generally politics, or art and governmentality specifically. The question of how do we want to be governed. And these exhibitions, which took on various titles, including Governmentality and the Government, were shown in a number of European locations, and also I think one version of it was in Miami at the Miami Basel Art Fair, or in a nearby location. So it was dealing with various territories, both museum territories outside of the museum network, and also territories such as a private collector's space within the context of an art fair. It's a delight to welcome Roger to the caucus. He's only staying briefly, but I think we're all interested in his contribution, particularly after what must be the extraordinary experience of curating Documenta and being so fresh from having signed off on that experience about a month and a half ago.
So I cannot even properly thank you now. This goes here. And this goes
there. So, thank you. Can we switch off the light? Please? Hmm?
It will get done. It's happening.
Yeah, like the light, I'm also very slow and easy to impress. But first of all, thank you very much, Charles, and all the people involved here in this institution to organize this caucus, and also the audience participating or sharing in. I think that what I have to say is very much related to this installation. Mario was just presenting to us, but so to speak, from the other side of the fence, I share the politics, I mean, behind this work, and it also corresponds to my own observations and to the observation of many people dealing with the notion of complexity. But then I'm also ambivalent about what such a piece is doing to me and what it's doing to an audience. Because on the one hand you are overwhelmed and shattered, which is fine. It's maybe a precondition to think anew or to think at all. But then you are also shattered in a way that makes you speechless, at least if you have a heart, and you don't know how to relate to any of this material, because in the end you are confronted with an artistic form. You're looking at a screen, and maybe the relation is different in the installation, because to have a couple of screens, something like a plural vision and sound talking to you, trying to get you into the narrative, but then also spilling you out, is doing something to you. Probably it does. But still, the images and the discourse keeps haunting me. So I think, out of respect for the work and also for the people involved in this work, I will try to relate what I have to say to what we've just seen, witnessed, experienced, and what's still going on. Because what I really hate is business as usual. So to find a way, or to conceive of a way to see relationally, meaning to relate things to each other, but also to yourself, is, of course, what subjectivity, but also exhibition making is about. I was struck in 2000 when I experienced something like petit bourgeois revolution in Austria by a certain quote, a speculation also from Agamben. It's not a serious speculation or a serious text like Homo Sacer. It's a bit superficial, even stupid. It's a speculation about class. What happened in Austria, something I just want to refer to quite superficially, but was the inclusion of a so-called right-wing party. I mean, it's of course a right-wing party, but I don't know really what this term could mean nowadays. The inclusion of a xenophobic right-wing party that was, on the other hand, opening up lots of protected Austrian industries and a whole economic system of labor, for example, to global capitalism. So like in Switzerland, where you have a millionaire running a right-wing chauvinist party, you had the same phenomenon also in Austria. And I mean, I don't want to generalize on it, but again, it points us to certain complexities and ambivalences. Because what's so moving about the transformation that is going on for 10 or 15 years in European countries has very much to do with this projecting, on the one hand, of certain notions of identity that are totally synthetic and can actually be made more fruitful in political propaganda wars than those notions of authentic identities the old conservatives had, and they still believed in certain notions of gloria and patria and family and so on and so forth. While this new generation of political pressure group is no longer really believing in those notions, but using them in a kind of strategic game, making them almost irresistible. This notion, or this text by Agamben, I'm not going to read it to you, just the first paragraph comes under the header "Without Classes," and it starts, "If we had once again to conceive of the fortunes of humanity in terms of class, then today we would have to say that there are no longer social classes, but just a single planetary petit bourgeoisie in which all the old social classes are dissolved. The petit bourgeoisie has inherited the world and is a form in which humanity has survived nihilism." This exhibition in 2000 on governmentality started with a reflection about what was going on in Europe, what was going on in Austria at that time. And again, I will sketch it out quite superficially because the details, I mean, all the details of this exhibition were important, but also only a starting point to orient my own interest very much into the direction of the spectator, of the audience, and in a certain relation away from art. So I became less and less interested in certain forms of artistic practices or of discourses in artistic practices, like institutional critique, context art, pop, deviance, and whatever, and more in how people actually perceive an exhibition and what it means to perceive an exhibition collectively. And at that point, I started to actually to play with audience and with audience's expectations, not by ignoring what artists were doing. All those exhibitions were conceived quite closely together with artists, but in a, I would say, highly experimental way, without declaring itself to be an experiment, because then again, I mean, you would enter into a certain kind of institutional rhetorics that would already be too safe or too secure. This piece here is Chinese porcelain jewelware from the late 12th century. It entered the imperial collection at some point. It was used by the imperial court for 10 or 15 years. It is now part of the National Palace collection in Taipei, so it's no longer in Beijing. It was evacuated by the Chinese bourgeoisie, fleeing Mao and his troops when Chiang Kai-shek and his entourage moved over to Taiwan. You may know about a certain piece Martin Heidegger has written on the thing, where he is comparing subjectivity or our way or possible ways to inhabit the world to pottery, where he is claiming that what the potter is doing is actually not forming a jar, but what she or he is actually doing is giving the void a shape so that being can appear. This is a speculation done in the 30s in Germany. It was taken up some decades later by Jacques Lacan in his 7th seminar on psychoanalysis, on the ethics of psychoanalysis, sorry, where he is referring to Heidegger's notion of the void, but pointing to the fact that what is being shaped by the potter is actually not emptiness, as if it were an entity, but simply a stand-in for another object. An object Lacan is referring to as das Ding, the thing, la chose, and which he also calls the impossible non-object of desire. Again, I will just mention this quite superficially because I would need at least 10 hours to make you or to introduce you to the concept of the impossible non-object of desire. But what I find helpful, or what helped me to think about exhibition and audiences, is actually this notion of affirmation, which is closely bound to the look or to the way we interpret objects or make objects our own. And this is not about objects like this one, which has the size of a shoebox. It's a narcissus planter, actually. It's not about real objects, so to speak, but also about films, like Mario's films, or about certain characters that move you, or certain sentences you keep in your mind, faces, an old man trying to move, and photographs, whatever. The point is that you have to develop or to cultivate a certain sensibility to keep yourself open, but not in this vulgar sense of an open society, more in this psychoanalytic sense of openness, in the sense of having an actual responsibility for your own relation to the external world, where actually your own relation to the external world refers to your subjectivity. In other words, you simply exist, but not in the true sense of being. You simply exist if you cannot relate to the external world in a structure that has to do with desire, because it, in a way, fills up this kind of void that is created by a primal loss. Again, here we would enter into the mystifications, or into some mystifications of psychoanalysis, where Freud, for example, has associated this primal loss with a mother as a lost object, or as a forbidden object, and also with the entry into language. But there's another notion that seems to me more interesting than mother, language, or kinship structure, or whatever. And this is what Kasia Silverman, in her book World Spectators, where she brings Heidegger and Lacan into dialogue, calls the evacuation of presence, the evacuation of spatial and temporal presence. And when I made myself comfortable to this idea, I realized that what you often have in certain genres of documentary work, but also in certain kinds of display, in particular in art fairs, is a certain stickiness, is too much presence. And that the discipline of the curator, and maybe also of the artist, may have to do with quite consciously creating this kind of void, or risking a kind of void, where you don't tell people that there is actually a void, and where you don't teach them beforehand how to perceive this void and to perceive it as a void, but where you start, or where you engage in a kind of social experiment, which is at the same time, of course, an experiment with aesthetic form, because the context of this experiment is always quite clear and related to art. To give you a kind of example of how this could look like, here's a photograph by by Lidwin van de Veen, and it shows a demonstration in Brussels. Again, it was photographed in the summer of 2006, when this war erupted between Israel and Lebanon. Correct me when I'm wrong. And it shows a highly precarious or fragile configuration, where you also have, like in the way Mario was attempting to convey complexity without sacrificing the specificities of a conflict, groups that you wouldn't normally include in such a dense situation or human composition. But what you also have, besides or beyond those markers, are those young men with this threat who somehow try, almost like in a performance or in a dance, to choreograph or to contain the political energies that you get from this image. This is another photograph by Lidwin van den Veen, where you have a certain lack of energy. It's a detail of a photograph showing Moroccan youth who wanted to take part in a demonstration against the first Iraq war, if I'm right. But they were banned from the demonstration in Amsterdam that was organized by the European Arabic League, and are staying on the threshold of the Dam, this former town hall of Amsterdam, in a situation of total ambiguity, because they are not part of their own group of the demonstration, but they are also not part of the official representation of the town hall. This is a group of citizens that is connected by this court that I have already mentioned as a metaphor, although you almost can't see it. What you have are those hands where the citizenry is pulling the same cord, so to speak. This is a detail of a painting, of a fresco in Siena, an allegory of good and bad government, painted by Lorenzetti in the mid-14th century. And here is how the political program was conceived at this time. I mean, there's an allegory of city life, and this is also the revolutionary element of this painting. There is not a ruler. The principle of government rests on certain principles of power and certain virtues like justice. Here you have Concordia, which is giving this court or handing this court to the citizenry, this court that is presented or handed out by the community as a whole. So you have here, while on the one hand, I mean, you have in this whole image a totally abstract notion of government, where government is not to be associated with people like Bush or Putin or whoever, but with principles. You also have a notion that may sound quite contemporary, even if it's highly dangerous, namely that Concordia, or this kind of concord, consensus, is the basis of society. This is, of course, also one of the major points of the democratic destabilization of Western countries, that it seems almost impossible, I mean, to found spaces of a kind of fruitful dissent. And that's one of the reasons why I came here to this caucus, because I have perceived the effort as an attempt not only to network. That's one way, because power cannot be fought individually or on an individual basis, but only structurally. But also that maybe if we are capable to reanimate I mean this link of aesthetics and ethics, we can also reanimate this sense as a core of a community, of an aesthetic and political community. Here's the detail of this fresco, and here is a fire exit of Oscar Niemeyer's Copan building in Sao Paulo. It was built in the early 50s, I think 52. And the Edificio Copan is a whole city, like Siena was. And it contains 5,500 inhabitants. And what struck me here as a metaphor for modernity is that you have this court, you have this element of binding, but you have it, first of all, exteriorized. It's not part of the inside, so to speak. And it's also nothing more than a fire exit. So it's a way actually to escape community. One of the ways I adapted to deal with those issues, with the issue of the void, with an attempt to evacuate presence, with a relation of a certain petit bourgeois resentment, I mean, towards the challenges of globalization, or what probably more aptly Guattari calls world-integrated capitalism, was to work with institutions, but outside of institutions at the same time. In 2002, or was it 2003? I don't. It all went so fast. I was commissioned with an exhibition in Barcelona by MACBA, by the local modern art museum, which has a funny history, like many museum buildings. It is part of a program of the city to revamp the city and to make it attractive for international tourists and also for congresses and so on and so forth. So what the people in Barcelona did was to destroy a whole quarter of the city, a very important quarter, that played a major role in the Civil War. So it was part of the collective memory in order to build a white elephant. Or in order to commission Richard Meyer to build a white elephant. The problem, or the local problem for the museum, was that they couldn't negotiate, or they felt they couldn't negotiate any longer the demands of this planetary hyper-bourgeois public with the demands of the local audiences. And they had to bring in a foreigner, myself, to make sense of the situation. What I did, because I had absolutely no idea what I was supposed to do, I was used on the one hand as a kind of guinea pig, but so that if it went wrong, all the blame could be laid on me. But on the other hand, it was highly seductive, because there was no rule, or there was no prescription of how to do these things. Was to work with a board of people. So I talked to people, and then I created this kind of board with urbanists, teachers, and so on. And we decided to make this exhibition in 3 significant places. One was a gym of a school. The other was a former textile factory where design offices went in, and architectural offices, and so on and so forth. And the third was an empty, defunct community center. This is a gym building. This is how the exhibition looked. I'm sorry for this kind of Rodchenko-like perspective. The photograph is done in a way to emphasize certain ways to make a display cohere. But I'm not talking about form today. This is the courtyard of this textile factory. I mean, Barcelona was called the Manchester of the Mediterranean, so the textile trade was a very important part. And the problem Barcelona has is that the city space is highly circumvented. On the one hand, you have the mountains, on the other, the sea. And if you want to bring in, I mean, if you don't want to die as a museum, but if you want to remodernize, you have to throw old industries. And this is how the exhibition looked inside. This is one piece, the Bruckmann suits by Alice Kreischer, Andreas Siegmann, and the workers from the Bruckmann factory in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. It is a factory that went bankrupt after the crash in 2001 and then was taken over by the workers, but not because they were revolutionaries. They simply thought that they would go crazy if they have no work any longer to do. And so they continue to sue, to create suits. I mean, before those suits were done for Yves Saint Laurent and Nina Ricci and others. And after 2001, they started to work without label. What is important for me about those things is that the actual exhibition corresponded in a certain way with issues at hand, identitarian issues that were relevant for a local audience. But on the other hand, they attempted to take this audience away from itself. So talking about spatial or temporal, or the evacuation of spatial or temporal presence, it meant, in an almost psychoanalytic way, that you listen to people, that you listen to their demands, and then you don't give them what they want, but you try to give them what they really want, or what they need. In this case, I mean, the trap was, of course, if you don't want to do this kind of upscale global exhibition, you end up in the trap of localism. The subtle thing for curatorial work is, as I already mentioned, to correspond with those issues without doing exactly what would be expected. And I think that this kind of void or discontinuity, or however you call it, also gives artists a very important space to work in, because on the one hand it's concrete. It's not a piece done for an exhibition somewhere. I mean, you can work on a situation. You have some material. You have something concrete. You have something to fight against and to resist. And on the other hand, you have a space of projection that is waiting for you, not to be filled, but to be taken up and handed over to an audience. This is also more or less the way I try to deal with this monster documenta, because it was quite clear that, I mean, at least for me, this was the first hyper-institutional offer I got before. It was always possible to navigate around the given formats, but with Documenta it was much more difficult. In a paradoxical way, not because the institution is fixed, like Venice Biennial, where you have already 40 Italians working 24 hours per day, and they bring in a new director and he says this or that, and they listen or not, and but continue to do what they're doing anyway. So, I mean, this is Rob Storr talking through my mouth, but you have a totally, I mean, an almost perversely or obscenely fragile institution that consists of no one except a CEO and his secretary, and but on the other hand, cathected with all those kinds of expectations people have from this exhibition. So what I did was to work the same way, because in Barcelona it proved fruitful, and start with a local board. I mean, to bring in people from the city, teachers, geographers. And again, I think it's important to say that this is not about democracy or participation. The point is that you are declaring with whom you like to work. But then it also means that you have to divest yourself of power, because you can attract people, at least intelligent people, only if you give them autonomous space they will take up and interpret in their own way. And the same way we dealt with this magazine project. I mean, this was done on a so-called global level, but in fact it was much more translocal than global, because it connected certain cultural geographies to certain topics I found interesting to think about. Ricardo Basbaum conceived of this object, I mean this kind of basin, which is basically empty, in the mid-90s, and it is quite related, if you're familiar with Brazilian art, to this kind of participatory practices we know from the work of Elio Oiticica or Ligia Clark, where you have an interesting synthesis of high modernity on the one hand, which is also informed by huge waves of migration from Europe to Brazil. Russians in the 30s, I mean, when the revolution went deadly wrong, but also, I mean, whole systems of thought like psychoanalysis, Jewish psychoanalytics who were forced to emigrate to, for example, Southern America and Brazil, on the one hand. And on the other hand, old African traditions, which are an after effect of the slave economy. And then, I mean, in artistic practice in the 50s and 60s in Brazil, you have this kind of merging of a psychoanalytic speculation about the social body or the governmental body, taking up Lorenzetti's notion, and African healing technique, which are not about talking cures, where there's a distance, someone is talking, like me, and you are listening, like the analytic, but where healing is related to touch. And Clark is an amazing example. Basbaum, Next Generation, is creating this object, which has possibly a kind of healing function. It's called basis of a new personality. So it's a kind of it's a void, of course. It's a kind of an empty fundament for a new way to relate to the world. And as an object, it's actually empty. It can frame the face of a silly adolescent, but it's not there. I mean, to be hung in a museum like a minimalist sculpture, but it's there to be used, to be enacted, and and what you have here is a coming together of this Chinese flower basin on the one hand, and of the appeal the Chinese flower basin has as a point of departure, and those modes of relationality Lorenzetti or Lidwin van der Veen has sketched out in relation to the court, because it's quite obviously that what you have here is not a community based on something like an identity or a religious belief or blood and earth or whatever, but on nothing. Whew. This is the sun. It's a lamp conceived by Olafur Eliasson. It's not the sublime Tate Modern version. It's a Louis Vuitton version. And it's also a piece that made me think, because on the one hand, we are dealing with notions of governmentality, not only in a political or sociological sense, but also, as I tried to make clear, in a psychoanalytic one. On the other hand, at least in the art world, we are also dealing with a certain tendency towards commodification or consumerism. I don't know what the right word is, but in any case, it's about a tendency to turn art into an object. So there are objects and objects. I mean, there are objects that fill presence, I mean, that are present in a certain way, and then there are objects that are at least partly absent. And the notion of the void, or this idea of the evacuation of presence, depends very much on people's attitude to keep the space open. The space which is here and which has to do, I mean, with your own way to relate to the world. At this point, it is important, I mean, to emphasize again that Lacan is calling his seminar about das Ding the ethics of psychoanalysis. So it has to do with a decision on the part of a viewer or of a human subject. The void as a condition to relate to the external world or to a situation like the one Mario has dramatized, depends on a desiring subject, on someone who is, by becoming or by creating a certain relation. And this desire thing is complicated. It's also over-theorized. What I want to emphasize only here is that there's not only the desire or the possibility, I mean, to turn oneself into a desiring subject, but there's also a desire to kill desire. And I think that they are quite closely connected and again have to do with ambiguity. Because to live with this void is not easy, and to kill the pressure or the tension you are creating in yourself by living actively contradictions is something you may want to regress from time to time. And this attempt to regress from the openness of a certain situation or the complexity of a certain situation is, and Germany is a perfect example, is best achieved collectively. This is Art Basel Conversations. It's me and Katrin David discussing progressive curatorial politics. And I thought, what does it mean that I have started to become an object in this chain of events and objects? The problem here is, of course, not that Bulgari is influencing my discourse or intervening in a way that would subvert the conscious and even unconscious intentions of my curatorial poetics. No, the point is much more subtle. It has to do with a certain framing, because when you do certain things, you cannot do other things. And so what's happening here is, I think, is a certain kind of, again, very subtle appropriation and identification of critical discourse with jewelry. This is a collection. It's a painting done in the beginning of the 19th century, 1822. I mean, it's a Chinese painting, but done by Chinese painters, heavily influenced by Jesuit Italian painters. So you have, but this is not an art history course, sorry. But it shows part of the imperial collections. And you have this woman with this blue flower in this painting. She's a courtesan, so she's also part of the imperial collection in a certain way. But what's interesting about this painting is that there's no object, or that there's almost no object, given in plain view. All those precious little things, and this blue basin is actually part of it. It's a scandal that you cannot see it on this projection, but you would be able to see it on my computer. So the projection is ruining my argument. Or maybe you believe me, at least in this respect. It's on the upper left. It's on the upper left corner. There's almost no object shown in its entirety. So there's something like a shadow of invisibility falling on the objects. And And I think that those are the two aspects I want to mention or want to emphasize in this respect and in this context. I mean, we know this also has to do with complexity. We know that we have to do several things at the same time, contradictory things even, and have to find a form for those contradictions, and aesthetics are offering us those forms. That's what I'm trying to point out, and that's also the reason why I'm staying in this field. Moving the institution outside of itself on the one hand, but also staying inside the institution, but presenting the institution, the collection, the exhibition in a way that is a little bit concealed. And in order to take up, I mean, those mentalities, I have just very superfluously sketched out this kind of global petty bourgeoisie. I think there's a possibility, I mean, to address people in between, I mean, in the gray zone, so to speak, between this kind of eccentric institution and hidden agenda. I mean, if you allow for those metaphors. And one last remark. Agamben has written his text without classes. Intuitively. I mean, it's not based on any kind of sociological analysis. And if you're interested, you'll find it in a book that is called The Coming Community. But of course, I mean, there is research done, serious research on the planetary petty bourgeoisie, that is on a petty bourgeoisie that is no longer attached to a national identity, but on the one hand tries to preserve certain privileges, while on the other hand kicking not only the asses of foreigners, but also actively breaking pre-modern forms of societies. I mean, societies that are often associated with Islam, for example. There is analysis done, and it was done in Germany between the wars in the 20s and early 30s by people like Werner Sombart and Theodor Geiger. And they tried to deal with the notion of class that was always overlooked by leftist political theory, and that is the middle class. People were concentrating, I mean, in this Marxist fashion, on the proletariat and on the bourgeoisie, and on this kind of class struggle. But there was never much emphasis put on the middle class, and this was wrong, and it was considered to be wrong by people like Theodor Geiger. Geiger managed to identify certain groups of the middle class. Again, I mean, if you look at this class in a more concentrated way, it disappears, and what you have are certain factions, or what he is calling a galaxy of mentalities and lifestyles. But he is analyzing the rise of the National Socialist Party in relation to the middle classes at the arch conservative class of the 20s. What you have now, and this is just a sketch, is in European societies is a dissolution of the middle classes, and the appearance of a new political subject, which is the freelancer. I mean, this kind of entrepreneurial identity. And again, I mean, there is research done on those figures and their way of relating themselves to their environment. And it is a really troublesome affair, what's going on there. I would even dare to relate it to the troubles we have seen in Mario's films, although the troubles are maybe less spectacular and have more to do with psychic tensions and also with a certain way of acting out politically the ambivalences of those various subjectivities. I think that those middle classes, or that this kind of middle class in the process of dissolution, is the main subject or the main point of references for contemporary institutions. We conceived of Documenta precisely this way in addressing those notions of identity or of failed identity. So, this is more or less what I wanted to offer you, and I hope that I could contribute something to your present dilemmas. Thank you.
Have you got another one? Okay, so we'll have to share one, sorry. We need to get another one. Roger, thanks so much for that. You don't know, because you weren't here, how much some of the things that you said played into some of the conversations we had yesterday and also this morning. So it is by chance, but perhaps not entirely by chance, perhaps also by a connection which exists beyond the immediate location, that many things were mentioned. I won't really make a summary, and I would also ask you unnaturally to start thinking about questions that you'd like to ask Roger at this point. But I wonder if I could mention or ask something about Documenta in relationship to what you said, and also to the critical reaction. I think we can't avoid this, perhaps. But one of the, personally, I think rather unfair criticisms that was directed at Documenta was the question of didacticism, the question of being pedagogic, I suppose. And what I found interesting about your talk was that the question, the void, the definition of the evacuation of presence that you used was, it seemed to me at least, the opposite of didacticism. I mean, the opposite of the idea of telling people not necessarily how to think, but how to think about how to think. But actually leaving that freedom, is it freedom? Leaving that space in which a contribution from an active audience, from what at one point you talked about the need for a cultivated mind, in a sense. And I was trying to tease out this relationship, which I'm still not sure, between why the exhibition, or why do you see that the exhibition produced the notion of didacticism in it, which I think hopefully you'd acknowledge as one of the reactions, against the question of your own intentions. What produced that resistance to some extent? Mm-hmm. And also, what do you mean by the cultivated mind? Is that not the didacticism coming in again, that people need to have a certain amount of learning? Or are you by the cultivated mind indicating something else that's not connected to learning, or not connected to the knowledge that might be gained through education? Mm-hmm. Can we start there?
Yeah, well, criticism. Yeah, there was probably. I mean, this critique of didacticism, but then there was also a complaint about any lack of useful information and orientation and an indication of what all this is about. So I think it was both in a way. Yeah, I think there is an element of learning in art. And I think that education is important. In particular, in a situation, I mean, like in Europe, where you have this kind of split between elitist universities on the one hand, where you have to pay, and this kind of public university or this kind of mass university, I don't know the situation in Holland, where education is getting worse and worse. And so in fact, the middle classes cannot reproduce themselves, and the relation or the experience many people of our generation have, also in the artistic field, is that they invest a lot of time and of course also money in kinds of higher education, but get really dirty jobs, I mean, out of all this effort. Because entering the professional field is postponed. I mean, you have a PhD, then you would do a postgraduate something, and then this and then that. And finally, with 40 or 45, you have to face reality. And this creates, and this creates, I mean, quite understandably, a certain level of resentment. And the problem is that people are alone, I mean, with this kind of resentment. And I mean, if they have a chance to write criticism, I mean, then they have then there's a ventile, maybe. But generally, I think this is a problem, and it's not only part of this kind of freelancer or self-employed individual in the arts, but I think it can be generalized. In Documenta, we decided to confront the audience with the possible trauma of not understanding anything, and also of telling them that maybe there's nothing to understand, and that maybe even knowledge is not really important as a category to understand our relations towards the world, because often knowledge can be the attempt of a sadistic subject, intent on digesting what is different from it, but preserving its own integrity. So I would always, that's why I would always privilege anarchy and confusion and irritation. But of course, I mean, this is not the end of the story. And we conceived of an educational program that is a bit, well, I mean, it plays with Schiller's notion of the aesthetic condition or the aesthetic community, where there are no longer guides who tell you the truth about the world or the art or the intention of the curator, but where a group shares a space and also a certain time to find out together what this is all about. Because by finding out together what it is all about, they also find out what it means for them. And I think this worked quite well.
I also experienced one of those with a German who had learnt Dutch from a book but spoke actually better Dutch than I did, which was very embarrassing when I was walking around with some colleagues. I think I would like to go. I have so many questions that I think I'm going to either talk too long or stop. And I think I would like to go to the audience and see whether there are any burning questions or not so burning questions which people would like to ask Roger. For a hand to go. There's one here with Shab.
Thanks for your interesting lecture. I was wondering about the slipperiness of the intermediate terrain between identity and the evacuation of presence as I was listening to your lecture. And I wondered if you answered it at the end there when you introduced the middle class in the midst of its dissolution. That's one question I had. And also I'd wondered if you could crisp up that, that kind of, how slippery that kind of move is from an intermediate terrain to the impossible object, as you put it. Well, in the already in the analysis of those German sociologists from the 20s, like Geiger, but also in the work of Sergio Bologna, for example, especially if you read it with a psychoanalytic perspective, because it's what I'm concerned with at the moment. I think that we don't need any more political analysis or sociological analysis. It's all quite clear and evident. So what the art world needs is a heavy psychoanalytic treatment. Without falling into the traps of psychoanalytic orthodoxy, of course. But with Silverman and Bersani, I just try to share my own way. I think that identity is a term that is totally meaningless. And that also people who talk about identity, at least that was my experience in Austria around 2000, when this Haider party took power, was totally void. That's what I try to point out between those new right parties and old right parties, that the old right parties really believed in family values and identity, while the new ones have totally synthetic, notions of what they call identity, but what actually means a much more fluid and highly opportunistic concept. It's like a chip that is, you implant yourself in order to stay afloat of the radical transformation of globalization or world integrated capitalism. So, and what I was the thing that interested me is that you still have people who have absolutely no identity and maybe also no need of identity. That would be my claim, still looking for identity. And I thought, naively, maybe it helps either to tell them that, wake up, you don't need it, you are already somewhere else, or where this kind of didactic measure wouldn't help, and I think it wouldn't help, to provide people with an alternative. With a void, although I don't want to overstretch this metaphor, but with this kind of educational situations we had in the exhibition, where you are informed in a way by a certain sensual latency, but are on the other hand also asked to come to terms, with your own habit, with your own categories of perception, with your own vocabulary, and so on and so forth. So this was a kind of therapeutic moment in my view. And this is what interests me. So I think at some point we have to stop to theorize and try to experiment with models that could provide an alternative to people who still think that identity is something they need.
Edwin, please.
You started by telling that you felt shattered by the video performance and that you did not know how to react. Does that relate to the concept of the stickiness you introduced later? Was that documentary too sticky? Was there too much reality in it to be able to take a distance from it and reflect on it?
Yes.
Not enough void.
No, the thing is, thank you. This is for myself, a very important question, because it helps me to make something clear. The point is, the void is not given to you, but you have to create it yourself. I mean, this is the ethical aspect of it, and that takes time. So for me, it wouldn't be normal to start talking after Mario's video presentations. But on the other hand, in this format, it would be totally mannerist to say, please give me an hour to digest what I've seen. So I think it is part of the, I don't think that presence as such is a problem, because being overwhelmed can also be very beautiful, actually, and necessary. For example, if you get seduced. Mm-hmm. But what is needed is to negotiate your own psychic time in relation to what's going on around you.
Thanks, Robin. Any other immediate questions? Yes, please. One, and then first the lady, sorry, in the middle, and then Grant. And then I'll come back with one as well.
Yes, I hope I can explain myself. I was wondering, how do you connect your visions that you showed us with the string connecting the people, and your attitude towards identity not being necessary? How can you connect people without identity?
I could also reverse the question, how can you connect people with identity? I think maybe non-identity is the only possible way to connect. I mean, where you create, the space together. It has to be said, because we shouldn't believe in images too much, that this painting was, of course, a projection by Lorenzetti. It was painted at a time when the city bourgeoisie that commissioned this painting was under heavy pressure from an emerging proletariat on the one hand, and from the old aristocracy on the other hand. So the court was, in a certain way, never there. It is a fantasy. It is an object. And but as an object, like in this Buergel piece with this basin, it points to a way of, on the one hand, connecting people without making or without turning this connection into a community. Without freezing this connection, so to speak. There's a sense of mobility. This is also the reason, or this is what the photograph of Litwin with this court at this demonstration helped me to show. That what this court is doing, it makes visible a kind of inner dynamics, so that the court could even be called to be a kind of enabling object, and much in the same way as this Buergel piece. People were supposed or are supposed to live with. So this would be my alternative to identity. This kind of fragile, threatened encounter that demands constant attention on the part of the subjects who are taking part in this.
But you still see a connection between people then, without having the same identity then?
Yeah, as I told you, I mean, if I would be polemical, I would say that people who have too strong an identity are not capable to talk any longer to each other in a meaningful way.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to actually continue this identity discussion, notwithstanding the problematic which you've mentioned, which is the difficulty of connecting up all of those identities into anything which kind of represents the idea of a common good or a sort of universal horizon of sorts. I think what's really interesting, and one thing we talked about this morning, was the way that whenever something becomes kind of dismissed from discourse, art immediately wants to pick it up again and look at it once more in a different way. And I think that, for me, perhaps there's something there in terms of representations of identity, which I actually appreciated in Documenta, in the fact that there was, to me, quite a lot of material that related to the idea of identity politics, or maybe a kind of restaging of that. And I wonder whether this goes back to what you were saying at one point about the notion of the aesthetic form providing a kind of milieu in which a contradiction can occur.
Yeah, also I think that there is, I think that there is also a difference probably, maybe we are talking about different kind of identity here. In identity politics, there's a claim, I mean, political claim, from groups marginalized by dominant culture, for example. So this is, I mean, when I'm referring to the work of Mother Rossler, for example, feminist work, Mary Kelly, homosexual discourse in Juan de Villa, and so on and so forth. And but I think that this has nothing to do with this notion of identity we were just discussing, which is a claim of a dominant class, I mean, to put it simply, to keep its privileges. I think what is interesting, on the other hand, is that there is an attempt also by world-integrated capitalism to destroy identity. I mean, when I have my average Viennese coffee house, Starbucks rents the shop next door, sells coffee a little bit cheaper. After 2 years, the coffee house goes bankrupt and Starbucks moves in. And then you have Starbucks in Vienna, in Tokyo, in Yogyakarta, and maybe in Eindhoven. And okay.
It's coming.
So I mean, this kind of standardization is a very important element, of course, and then again, I mean, it forces you to think, renew about identity. So, do you want to follow the way of José Bové and define, I mean, the authenticity of the French grape against those foreign Argentinian or Australian grapes, and so where you have this kind of displaced racism projected on grapes, but also a rational argument because it costs incredible sums. I mean, to ship bottles over from Argentina just to have an average red wine in Lyon. So. I think the identity I was clinging to are psychic identities, and they are not identities that can be identified, so to speak, but that are in a certain way virtual, that are felt as lacking, as a void, but where people have to be taught, and here didacticism might come in, that this void is actually necessary. And this is a tension we have to face, because it makes us human. And it also turns us into desiring subjects.
There's some from up in the gods, as they said.
Oh, God
So,
is here?
So my question was, what is your view on authorship in this light?
Highly problematic. I'm constantly in fight with artists when I'm doing exhibitions. I mean, not with all of them, but with some of them always. So I wouldn't, but I wouldn't debase authorship, and as I not only rhetorically but also psychically or physically even wanted to show. I mean, I'm heavily influenced by what people are doing and what they think about what they are doing. On the other hand, I'm also not ready to fetishize authorship. I think that at this particular moment, November 2007, spectatorship is a more important category.
Could I just, that's an opportunity, I'm sorry, I will come back to you, I promise. I just wanted to come in on that because you mentioned spectatorship and you talked about a need for openness on the part of the spectator. And you said in parentheses, and I think very importantly for us, you're not talking about the open society notion of openness. You're talking about another kind of openness. We can go back to the open society question a little bit later. But this openness then expects something from the viewer, from the audience, from the person who's coming to the exhibition or who's coming to the experience of a particular artwork. It sets up on our side, if you like, mm-hmm. if we can put ourselves on the same side for a moment, which I think we are fairly much. It sets up on our side an expectation of the side which is going to become the guest in a situation which we have set up. Mm-hmm. What's interesting to me about that is that it seems to be counter to most of the requests that are delivered to people within world integrated capitalism or within the idea of the consumer, mm-hmm. the idea of providing you what you want. Mm-hmm. How do you see that tension between the two playing out? And does that, I suppose I'm trying to say, is the space of the aesthetic space, which was the art institutions, mm-hmm. are they therefore for you, do they mark a significant difference from that space of consumer capitalism? Or is that difference important to mark within the institutions or within the field of aesthetics that we're busy with?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to, again, I mean, to sketch out a little bit, I mean, how has become, I mean, more or less impossible to make a difference between Macy's and Art Basel, mm-hmm. and also to the way, I mean, discourse is appropriated, but appropriate would be the wrong word, is migrating into an art fair, and also how, yeah, exhibitions or institutions are under the spell of consumerism. But nevertheless, I mean, I'm not thinking about leaving the field. The tension is there, and I think that part of documentary criticism also derives from this tension or from this simple frustration of certain expectations. But then I also think, I mean, I think, I try to think not pessimistically, but optimistically. or at least skeptically, about people's ambivalence. Because on the one hand, I mean, you may feel this desire to kill desire by buying Olafur Eliasson's lamp and take it home and make it your own in a way and close the void because you have digested the sun, so to speak. But on the other hand, people are also always attracted to give up this this option and take care of themselves in this Foucauldian notions, which means refusing to be what we are, and to think about the relationship between themselves as subjects and as individuals, because they have enough of exploiting the individual within themselves in order to be able to function as a subject in work relations, for example. And this also holds true, I mean, for Documenta, because this element of self-exploitation is very much part of the job. And you are, I mean, asking yourself, I mean, how long it might continue, and when is the right time to stop. But again, I think what is important is not, I mean, of course, you also have to take individual decisions when you think about your own life. If you want to get a heart attack as a world-famous curator with 55, because you were, yeah, still some time left, I hope. But the important thing is to, I think, to create a kind of movement or a collectively shared sensibility to ask or to address those questions. And yeah, that's why I'm here.
It's also that I ask it in relationship to how to define some of the activities that the art institutions, certainly the publicly funded art institutions, how they might be able to act together in a certain way, which it seems to me to be very important at the moment, that we cannot do this on our own. That an institution like Vanabbe, which of course I'm obsessed by, but it could be any other institution as well, it just happens to be this one, is extremely weak on its own. And it's also about how that solidarity can be expressed by saying, okay, these institutions are marked out to have, or we believe to have, certain functions, which are different from functions that are satisfied elsewhere, and therefore they can claim a space. So that's partly why I think it's a longer discussion, and it's something that needs to go on for many years. It has time, but that claiming of space of the institution, that claiming of the right to offer a void, that claiming of the demand of the responsibility to cultivate yourself or to be open in the part of the audience, seems to me to be very crucial also to our discussions in relationship to what this is all about, what this event is. Erwin, can I shut up now and go to you?
Yeah. I wanted to come back for a moment to this very enigmatic definition, the desire to kill desire. Because it also means, I think, the desire to kill the other. Because if, as you said, we have to define ourselves by our lacking identities, it also means that the other is a lacking identity. So when we confront him, he is somehow the void, and not the Muslim or the immigrant or the illegal or the enemy. Because by that we fill him, and by that we kill him and have the possibility to kill him. So what you said about keeping open somehow the space in the confrontation with the work of art, this void that gives the viewer the time to reflect, probably that space is even more important in the interrelational aspect, that we keep the void open, that we keep the other open as a void. And as you said, that's something very important. And not only very important, but also very difficult, because we immediately have the reaction to give a meaning or to give a name and to fill this void. So the desire to kill desire, we have tried to kill the desire to kill desire once more, in order to keep the society from really killing.
Okay, this was not a question, am I right?
There is another one up here.
Yes, to continue a little bit about one of the questions I think here at the caucus is what can the museum do for the void, and how can the void be created by an institution that brings art and therefore be consumed by its environment, so to say, the community where it functions in. So the question is, how can you, as an institution, create a void sufficiently big that the audience comes and to consume the institution, so to take over and participate in such a way that that it becomes functional within their void or in their lives? And how does that apply to large-scale exhibitions like the Documenta?
I think the first question was directed at you, probably.
That's the second part.
I have chosen this Magba example because it was also an ambivalent experience, but it was a way to deal with certain issues, to take up notions that strongly relate to a local identity, the school, the textile factory, the community center. So those are all spaces that are inhabited physically, but also mentally, because they are they contain history, and to use this kind of energy or internal dynamics of such a space, like this Duruti factory, in order to project or redirect part of this energy away from this kind of local myth making, which would be part or would become part of identitarian politics, where you tell yourself and your children and the children of your children how great it was and how revolutionary we were, and those were the times, and so on and so forth. But to use it to relate to other struggles and see the similarities in a kind of universal struggle connected through aesthetic forms. I mean, that's what why I've shown, but it could also have been done in more detail, of course. Nada Dimic factory by Sanja Ivekovic. It's a factory that was named after a Yugoslav partisan, a woman who was killed by the Germans when she was 23. So all the Yugoslavs for generation had this name of, or this label of Nada Dimic on their body, even though they didn't know that it was a woman and a partisan. But and with Bruckmann the same. With so I think what I did was quite sketchy, because I was more interested in the complexity of various elements. I think it can be done. So there is a methodology there. About Documenta, I think the first thing is to get rid of this notion of large scale, or what this could mean, and turn it into what it really is, a local exhibition, and see what you can do with this notion of the local, because what you discover if you talk to people in Kassel, is of course that they are not from Kassel. So you have Turks, you have Arabs, you have Chinese, and so on. So I mean, this whole notion, I mean, suddenly dissolves. You find a guy from Kassel, Hans Staden, who went to Brazil in the 16th century and was almost eaten by cannibals, but he was too thin and was sent back. And this is an element of local history that was turned by Dias Riedwig into a kind of a film in progress. And the same with this, also with this magazine network. I mean, there you have various localities who may have each other something to say or not. But I don't want to talk too much about Documenta. It's an open-ended issue. But I mean, what you have to do, I mean, in order to create this kind of void is, of course, to destroy, first of all, I mean, your own expectations of such an exhibition, and then also the expectation of almost everyone else.
Maybe, Alad, I can answer also on behalf of the museum a little bit. I'll try to keep it quick, but I think that the difference between the big exhibition and some of the things that Roger has been doing and us here in the museum is a question of time and a question of how you can unfold something. We have years, potentially, if we don't all get fired by the City Council at some point. We do potentially have some years in which we can unfold a certain process. And so I feel that at least the sense of trying to create different expectations in the audience, which I think it's gone dead now, obviously. That was the Wethouder for Cultuur. There isn't another one. Hello? Is there any reason why it's gone dead? Is it battery? Maybe you can fix it. Where was I? To be very quick, and no, they've all gone dead. They've all gone dead, no? No, that works now. Yeah, okay. It's fine. Yeah? It's good. No. Perfect. You have to have technical problems, otherwise it wouldn't be a caucus or a conference, would it really? Just where I was, it's a question of time, I think, is an important issue in relationship to something like the museum. And I think also that over that time you have to see it as a learning process. I mean, if there's an educational process going on in the museum, there might be one in relation to the audience, and to try and think about how to change the expectations of somebody that walks in here from a kind of passive, show me what you've got, to a different kind of expectation of a responsibility, perhaps, of how can I fill this void, which is not going to show me anything without my own engagement with it. But I have to say that learning process is a long-term one, and it's not something which is provided by a single moment or a single exhibition or a single activity. And I think certainly as we've been developing Becoming Dutch, Annie and I and other people within the museum, we've become more and more conscious of this void, actually, that is the exhibition in May 2008. Which is absolutely a void. It's very beautiful that you use this term because it helps us to understand what we're doing. And this void, potentially, it can be filled through this process. Whether it will be or not, of course, is another question. And whether it should be or not, maybe is something we should address. Maybe the Becoming Dutch exhibition should simply be a void. It's something that we should consider, I think, at least before we reject it. So therefore, that whole process, at a certain level, invites a kind of filling of the void, because we have, as I set out those two kind of objectives of the caucus. The one is the very, very provincial and local question of this exhibition in May 2008, and the other one is this question, which is probably equally voided of meaning, which is how can we live together better? And at those two levels, the macro and the micro, I think we are faced with at least uncertainty, if not the evacuation of presence. Another question, please. Yes, Dimitri. Now there is no microphone left.
Thank you. I'm quite curious, because the most fascinating things what you just recently told us, Charles, and Roger, it's actually the relations between such institution as museum and particular document, its relation to history. Because many things make sense that produced in museum and in document, it's actually has some supposed to have some historical meanings. But at the same time, we can hardly continue thinking about history without reconsider who is the subject of history. And it might bring us again to the discussion about that institutions, because from Enlightenment, okay, that subject was quite common opinion that was new bourgeoisie. And right now, for example, it's very good how you started with the Gambin's quote about the crisis of, or when everyone converge into petit bourgeoisie and we lack in any other subjectivities. At the same time, this subjectivity already in crisis. That's why you finish somehow with that determination of new freelance kind of free agent. But at the same time, I really doubt that that free agent gaining new steps into the void can really continue emancipatory or even at least the idea of history, how it can be continued. Also that relation with the public, because at the same time, as far as I remember from your leitmotifs, actually you were trying to continue that addressing kind of radical subject. For example, just mentioning what is to be done, okay, with all that connotation from Chernyshevsky to Paulo Freire. Actually, I think that actually it wasn't, I've never heard your direct relation to Freire, that pedagogy of oppressed. Okay, who are oppressed now? Where are they located? How such sort of biggest show and challenging projects like museum politics is able to address them if they exist. So that, you know, that circle of questions that came into my mind and I found for me very urgent in many sense. Thank you.
Oh. Maybe I start with the latter part of your of your question or your command. Also, I'm not sure about it myself, but I mean, before and in particular during the preparation of Documenta, I met many people who are running spaces wherever, in Cotonou, for example, and I thought that it would actually be part of my responsibility. I mean, not responsibility with a big R, but that it would be attractive to start to continue to work with them and to support them, and using Western funding basically, also to sustain them. I mean, this is a particularly relevant, I think, in Africa, because there is no structural support. The state-funded institutions are very weak, I mean, to put it mildly, except for a few countries like Mali, for example, where there was a post-colonial effort in art and education. But I think that Western institutions, and also the Western institution I'm attached to, have or should enter into a kind of collaboration with those institutions and adopt them in a nice way. So I think it would be wrong to associate this kind of adaptation with colonialism, but nevertheless it has to be controlled and also monitored. But still, I mean, I think that intelligent people are capable to do that. This is one thing, and this is also true, I mean, for this whole magazine project, because this was more or less a start for an alternative network to magazines based on gallery advertisements. And first question, the subject, I don't know. I think there's no alternative. I think that this bourgeois, the same way as Lorenzetti was projecting a community that was not existing, it was a dream of the political elite of that time. The museum of the 19th century projected a certain viewer who was also a dream in a certain way, because I mean, in particular, in Germany, I think the educated class or the educated bourgeoisie became totally corrupted. I mean, by the incapability to resist to the rise of National Socialism. That's also one of the reasons why Documenta became important and is still interesting. I mean, from such a viewpoint. I think that there is an interest in seeing different things. I mean, to put it simply, this was my experience from Documenta, and that to destroy, I mean, the notion of the contemporary art museum, I mean, the first step for a methodology in museum work, probably, that puts contemporary art in a more anthropologic perspective. I think that's highly needed.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on this aspect of now you said it yourself, anthropology, and also the idea of including the African continent within this whole discourse of fine arts. And I've just been to Mali doing an art project there, so I would really like to hear a little bit more about that out of a personal interest.
Yeah, where?
Mali in Bamako.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And where in Bamako?
I'm not sure you're familiar with the Centre Soleil d'Afrique, and okay.
Yeah, this question. And the question before, the suppressed, Paulo Freire. What I wanted to point out when I was talking about the freelancer and this element of self-exploitation and Foucault's strategy of resistance, this tendency of we have as subjects, sorry for generalizing, to exploit our individual in order to work better and to relate better and to network better and to optimize our resources. So I think the suppressed are within ourselves. I mean, there are also a few others. We are aware of that. But still, I mean, I think before we start to liberate the people of whatever, start here, or do it both at the same time. And Africa, yeah, I mean, this
anthropology maybe is a way of getting at Africa.
Okay.
Although that sounds
well, the idea of adopting I thought very interesting.
This local council or this local board, this Beirat in Kassel, was based on a cultural center that existed already 20 years ago, It's run by two women, Christine Knüppel and Esche, who played also an important part in in the process of the exhibition proper. And it was a lesson we learned from the Bataille Monument. There is a tendency, or maybe it's over, but there was a tendency to commission artists to do local work, site-specific work. And in certain exhibitions, like the Liverpool Biennial, this has become a kind of trademark phenomenon where you are even forced to create something site-specific because it has become part of, or it has been adapted by city marketing. So the high art is in finding a place that is outside of the control of the city government, but it's also not threatened to disappear, because Hirschhorn created something that was relevant for the people in this quarter, but then it collapsed like a soufflé after Documenta, and no one ever heard of it again. And so it was a programmatic decision to base this Beirat on this Schlachthof, on this cultural center that will survive Documenta 12. And I think the same principle also applies to this kind of institution building. You work with, or you try to work with those little magazine spaces, because it's a form of organization, a magazine, basically. Of course they are producing a magazine, but it's a space in a certain way, where you rely on people who can also capitalize on Documenta in order to continue or to go on, if alone to acquire funding, because they can say, hello, we are part of Documenta, to their local governments. About anthropology, you're in Urge?
No.
About anthropology, this is a complicated issue. What you don't want to have in an exhibition like Documenta is representation of geopolitical identities like Africa, Asia, India, and because then you know the problem. I don't have to go into it. On the other hand, you want to keep, the sense of specificity or of materiality, or the textual, the haptic. Grant was mentioning. I think that, or at least from my view, that the whole world of contemporary art making has created a false paradigm, and in order to destroy this paradigm, I found it necessary to relate contemporary art practices both to history, so on a vertical level, so to speak, but also on a horizontal level to dealing with notions of form. And I keep it abstract like this. We did it with certain cultural geographies, and Africa is a particular difficult area with, for example, textile work. But we also did it in Europe. Spain as a whole was totally offended by the invitation of Ferran Adrià, by this famous chef, that an institution like Documenta ignored painters and filmmakers and sculptors, but invited a chef, was really an embarrassment. But not. It was different than the embarrassment that was faced by the art world, or this kind of mockery you have by including a chef, because it was also perceived as a kind of aristocratic gesture from my part. I mean, to have my own private chef, so to speak, and this kind of very elitist situation where you have two people shipped every night to Girona. So my interest in form, and I mean it's hard for me to argue this in 2 or 3 minutes, derives probably from a sensibility to what Jacques Rancière is calling the le partage du sensible. How is it translated into English? But the way, I mean, the world perceived as a set of forms a priori is organized. Where organized also means distributed in a certain way, and where certain asymmetries are woven in, and so on and so forth. So this would be more or less my answer, that by destroying the notion of contemporary art and putting it into relation to other practices, also to media work, for example, not only to carpets and weaving, helps us also to find probably another relevance in the specificity of contemporary art practices.
We can take one more question if that's okay, Roger. It's just slightly over 5, so one more question and then I'll have to call it quits, but we will be having a drink afterwards, I think.
Can I say one more word? Alois Riegel, the founder of Art History, and one director of the now Museum of Applied Art in Vienna, was looking for 10 or 15 years at Oriental carpets, and I mean the foundations of art history lay here in a reading of forms, and but Riegel's argument. Or his analysis of Oriental carpets, of Persian carpets, was a political one, because he, by pointing out this trajectory of the acanthus motif, and by being able to relate it or to re-relate it to Greek motifs or to Hellenistic motifs, he was actually able to share that what was called Oriental is actually Occidental, that there's a common ground, and that the museum and also the imperial court has no reason not to fund pieces from, for example, from Middle Asia. I think that this is quite interesting in this respect, and it is my view that we have to come to a museum or to a way or to methodologies of museum work where you don't have to take those divisions like contemporary art or ancient art or Hellenistic art, textiles, whatever, as granted, but where you can work with it.
Yes, may I ask? I must say I really was really relieved when I saw that you have included all the other disciplines like textiles. I mean, I have an interest in that as an art critic as well, and I thought it was finally I could see an exhibition where it was combined, but and also the historical approach. But one thing that is going on in my mind, there's a migration of form. You showed that. But as for the meaning, I think there's two things, meaning and form. There's two lines of thought you can follow. But if you talk about this void, I think it seems to me very important the society that this void is being formulated in. I think it's connected to society. I think historically things were made in commission and that they had definite meanings, specific meanings. And that the fact that we are defining art as a point of, as a kind of receptacle for our own reflections on ourselves, that is very much tied to a certain society where we love freedom and individualism. And do you agree with this? I mean, I think it's only since maybe the 19th century that we can think this way, because from that moment on the artist start to step aside of society and is not making his work in commission. No, he's more or less regarded as a prophet who is having certain ideas about society, and we're waiting for him to reveal these ideas to us in his artwork. And I think it's only an expression to see it that way that is connected to our way of living. And I think that now in globalization, this way of living is becoming more broadly in the whole world, accepted in cities especially, so that now you can also have in Africa or this art center, for example, that also defines art that way. I think that has to do with capitalism in a way.
Yeah, but maybe it also has to do with love. Because I think that there's also a level where you appreciate things. This might be silly, a little bit, but it's nevertheless an attitude. But if you, really appreciate something, I think then you start to investigate and to come up, with a specific meaning. But even if I explain to you in detail the program of an oriental carpet, like the garden carpet, there's still, this artifact, and there's something I think in between the explanation and the piece itself, because it means something to you. If it means something to you, that is also related to other things, to unconscious memories, for example. Whatever, but at least to certain dimensions of your personality. So yes, I think I'm in this respect very conservative. There is an element of aestheticism and connoisseurship in dealing with those things, but I don't. But I wouldn't think that this would stop people from going further. Documenta was a huge hypothesis. Not more. Maybe it can be done this way, maybe not. But actually it was a constellation of several hypotheses, because all the exhibition spaces look different, as you will have realized, in relation to the era they come from. And the pavilion, this 21st century space was a fantasy about a time that will probably come when the biennial and the art fair will look the same and will have melted. So I agree, basically, that you have to come up, with knowledge, or that you probably start to care for things if you have started to appreciate them. But the first thing is that they are shown in a way that enables you to appreciate them.
But my question is, I don't doubt, I think aesthetics, like Plato once said, that a form is you're enlightening your spirit, it's giving your spirit wings. He said, so I think aesthetics can have a certain mental impact. But my question is about whether this way of looking at art as a point of reflection is connected, in your opinion, to a certain form of society, a political form of society, a capitalistic, free, democratic, or you name it, society, or not?
Yeah, probably, but maybe this is my blind spot because I'm part of the society. Maybe other people have to tell me. But I think that if we look at the way contemporary work is produced, I mean, I think we are this dichotomy between commissioned work and so-called free work dissolves. Artists have an imaginary viewer in mind. That's one thing. And this can become a kind of almost terroristic figure, so a kind of artistic superego. But they are also part of a certain production system. I mean, as you know, also with this biennial system, I mean, they are actually commissioned to produce work in a very short amount of time, with almost no money. And what comes out of it is this genre of the one idea art, where you have a certain idea and then you do it almost overnight, and next day, I mean, you send the video to the curator. So this kind of thing. And I don't think that it has much to do with freedom, actually.
No. Well, maybe one last detail. If you compare it with advertisement, I think it's very interesting if you would compare advertisement, the forms and the shapes. I mean, they're very professionally made, but we don't look at it as art because of the content. Because the content is dictating us something, and we don't like that. We don't define that as art. But it is really an important aesthetic part of our society, in which content is revealed. If you compare that to your definition of what art is, then maybe it gives an idea about what is the condition behind it.
Okay, I will follow this line of thinking.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone. I'm afraid we've run out of time for questions, but as I say, we'll have a drink now. Just what sorry, I can't resist this one comment. I do think to put capitalism, freedom, and democracy in the same sentence and say they're the same thing is something we really can't do, because I think they're three very, very different concepts. And I always remember exactly. I always remember the designer actually of the vanabbemuseum, Dejan Kasic, saying that after the changes after '89 and the war in former Yugoslavia, he's from Zagreb, and he said. When they were thinking to change the system, the Titoist system in the late 80s, and they demanded democracy, they didn't know that they're going to get capitalism as a free gift. And I think this is an important distinction that we need to make. Anyway, thank you very much for your question. Thank all of you for your questions, and most of all, a very big thank you to Roger Buergel. Thank you very much.